There is a God in the Bible who is mentioned more than almost any other name besides God himself. He's not a minor character. He's not a footnote. He is the single greatest spiritual threat that Israel faced for over 500 years, and they kept choosing him over and over again, even after watching what it cost them. His name is Baal, and the story of Israel's relationship with Baal is one of the most heartbreaking, confusing, and theologically revealing stories in all of Scripture. Because the question isn't just who Baal was. The question is, why couldn't they stop? What was so compelling about this God that the people who had witnessed the Exodus, who had seen the Red Sea part, who had eaten manna in the desert, kept crawling back to him generation after generation? Today, we're going to answer that question, and when we do, some of what we find is going to feel uncomfortably familiar.
Who was Baal? Baal was the supreme deity of the Canaanites, the people who occupied the land before Israel arrived. His name simply means Lord or Master in the Semitic languages of the ancient Near East. He was the god of storms, rain, thunder, and fertility. In a world entirely dependent on agriculture, that made him the most practically important god imaginable. No rain meant no crops. No crops meant starvation. So the god who controlled the rain controlled everything. Baal was typically depicted as a powerful warrior standing on a mountain, holding a lightning bolt in one hand and a club in the other. He was young, strong, and dynamic, everything that felt immediate and responsive. He had a consort, Asherah, the goddess of the sea and fertility, whose worship involved wooden poles erected near altars, the Asherah poles you read about throughout the Old Testament. And he had a rival, Mot, the god of death. Canaanite mythology describes an annual cycle in which Baal battles Mot, dies, descends to the underworld, and is resurrected, bringing the rains and the harvest with him. That cycle, death, resurrection, renewal, was baked into every Baal worship ritual. It was a religion built around the rhythms of nature and the desperate human need for things to grow.
The first seduction, before they even entered the land. Israel's first encounter with Baal worship didn't happen after they settled in Canaan. It happened while they were still in the wilderness, camped at a place called Peor. Numbers 25 describes what happened. Israelite men began sleeping with Moabite women, who then invited them to sacrifice to their gods. The text says they yoked themselves to Baal of Peor. God's response was swift and severe. A plague killed 24,000 people. This was before the Promised Land, before the conquest, before the kings, and already Baal had his hooks in them. Why? Because Baal worship wasn't just theology, it was a total social and cultural package. Worshipping Baal meant participating in the broader Canaanite world, their feasts, their communities, their women, their economic networks. It was the religion of everyone around them. Opting out meant social isolation. This pattern, Baal as the religion of belonging, of fitting in, of not being the weird outsiders, runs through the entire Old Testament story.
The cycle of Judges. The book of Judges contains one of the most repeated and painful phrases in Scripture. It appears over and over like a drumbeat. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. Then consequences, then crying out to God, then a judge, then deliverance, then rest, then again the Baals. 7 times this cycle repeats in Judges. 7 times. They watch God deliver them. They watch the consequences of abandoning him. And then within a generation, sometimes within years, they go back. Judges 2:11-13 gives us the summary. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshipped various gods of the peoples around them. They aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served Baal and the Ashtoreths. Scholars point out something important here. The Israelites weren't necessarily replacing God with Baal. Many of them were adding Baal. Syncretism, blending their faith in Yahweh with Baal worship, was the more common pattern. They kept going to the temple and going to the high places. They wanted both. This is what made it so spiritually deadly. It wasn't outright rejection, it was dilution.
Ahab, Jezebel, and the national endorsement of Baal. The Baal problem reached its peak under King Ahab of Israel, the northern kingdom, in the 9th century BC. Ahab was already weak when it came to foreign gods, but then he married Jezebel. Jezebel was a Phoenician princess, the daughter of the king of Sidon. She was a devoted, aggressive, missionary-level worshiper of Baal. And when she became queen of Israel, she didn't bring her religion quietly. She brought it institutionally. 1 Kings 16:31-33 tells us that Ahab built a temple for Baal in Samaria. He erected an Asherah pole. He did more to arouse the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, than all the kings of Israel before him. But Jezebel went further. She began systematically killing the prophets of the Lord, hunting them down and having them executed. While she was doing this, she was funding 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah, all eating at the royal table. This wasn't individual Israelites dabbling in Canaanite religion anymore. This was state-sponsored Baal worship. The king's house, the national treasury, the royal protection, all behind Baal. The true God of Israel was being criminalized in his own land.
Elijah in the contest on Mount Carmel. Into this situation steps one of the most dramatic figures in all of Scripture, Elijah the Tishbite. God sends Elijah to Ahab with a message: there will be no rain in Israel, no dew, no rain until Elijah says so. Remember, Baal is the god of rain. This is a direct challenge. The God who supposedly controls the weather is about to watch his worshipers die of drought. 3.5 years pass. Nothing. The land dries up. The rivers fail. The famine becomes severe. Then comes the showdown. Elijah summons Ahab and demands that all Israel gather at Mount Carmel, along with the 450 prophets of Baal. The proposition is simple: 2 altars, 2 bulls, 2 prayers. The God who answers by fire, he is God. The prophets of Baal go first. They pray, they shout, they cut themselves, they dance around the altar from morning until evening. Nothing, not a flicker, not a spark. Elijah mocks them. Shout louder. Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought, or busy, or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened. Then Elijah repairs the altar of the Lord, places his bull on it, and drenches everything in water. 4 large jars poured 3 times. The altar is soaked. The trench around it is full. Then he prays a simple, brief prayer. Fire falls from heaven and consumes the offering, the altar, the stones, the soil, and licks up the water in the trench. All Israel falls on their faces. The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. The 450 prophets of Baal are seized and killed at the brook Kishon. Elijah prays. The rain comes. Baal, the god of rain and storm, sat silent while his own prophets bled and begged, and then the God of Israel made the skies open with a word.
Why did Israel keep going back? After Mount Carmel, you'd expect the story to end. It doesn't. Elijah flees into the wilderness because Jezebel vows to kill him. Baal worship continues. The northern kingdom keeps sliding. And when Assyria finally conquers Israel in 722 BC, one of the stated reasons in Scripture is precisely this: they had served Baal. So why? Why, after everything, could Israel not stop? The answer is uncomfortable because it's the same answer that applies to every generation, including ours. First, Baal worship was visible. You could see the idol. You could see the altar. You could feel the ritual.
Faith in an invisible God requires something Baal worship didn't: trust without immediate evidence. Second, Baal worship was transactional. You perform the ritual, you get the rain. Simple, mechanical, controllable. The God of Israel was relational. He called his people to covenant love, obedience, and trust, not a transaction. That's harder. Third, Baal worship was cultural. Everyone around Israel worshipped Baal. Refusing to participate meant being the outsider, the strange one, the religious zealot. The pressure to conform was enormous and constant. Fourth, the prophets of Baal were organized, funded, and politically protected. When the culture, the government, and the religion all point the same direction, resisting takes extraordinary courage. Baal in the New Testament and today. The name Baal appears in the New Testament too, in a form you might recognize. In Matthew 12:24, the Pharisees accused Jesus of casting out demons by the power of Beelzebul, the prince of demons. Beelzebul is a corruption of Baal-Zebul, Baal the prince or Baal the exalted. It's a name for Satan. By the time of Jesus, the connection was explicit. Baal worship wasn't just idolatry, it was demonic. The spiritual forces behind that ancient altar were real, and they were still active. The Apostle Paul in Romans 11 references the story of Elijah directly, quoting God's words, "I have reserved for myself 7,000 who have not bowed the knee to Baal." Paul uses this to reassure the church that even in the darkest cultural moments, God always has a remnant, people who refuse to bow. 7,000. In a nation of millions, 7,000 who said no. Baal is gone in name. His temples are dust. His prophets have been dead for 3,000 years. But the spirit of Baal, the demand that you bow to whatever the culture worships, the promise of prosperity in exchange for compromise, the pressure to blend in, to add just a little of what everyone else is doing to your faith, that never went away. The Israelites didn't fail because they were uniquely weak or faithless. They failed because they were human, facing the same temptations every generation faces. Be comfortable, fit in, don't be the one who stands alone. Elijah stood alone on Mount Carmel. He thought he was the only one left. God told him there were 7,000 more, hidden, faithful, unbroken. In every generation, God has his 7,000. The question is, which side of that number you're on? Subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden history and forgotten truths of the Bible.